Listen, I want you to picture yourself standing at the edge of a vast field. It's just you alone, facing that open space that stretches out so far you can't see the horizon. The air is thick with possibility. In your heart, you know you're about to embark on a journey, one that demands courage, self-respect, and a willingness to release what no longer serves you. That's what it feels like when you decide to break emotional ties with someone who's draining your spirit. Tonight, I want to share with you 5 rules on how to emotionally detach from someone, because sometimes loving yourself means letting go. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is create a little distance from what hurts you most so that you can heal and grow. The power in this message is undeniable. And I promise you, if you stay with me, if you open up your heart and receive these words, by the end of this, you will have the strength to walk away from relationships that keep you stuck and a roadmap to move forward with dignity. This is your life, your story, and it's time you took the pen firmly in hand. You see, there's a crucial difference between living and merely surviving. Surviving means taking each breath, going through the motions, letting your emotions be pulled like a puppet on strings by someone who may not honor your soul. But living, truly living, requires that you protect your peace, protect your sanity, and learn how to release emotional chains that hold you hostage. If that resonates, if that stirs something deep in your gut, then you're exactly where you need to be right now. Ask yourself, have you ever felt powerless in a relationship? Have you ever lost sleep, lost focus, lost yourself trying to please someone who wasn't giving you the same respect or love in return? The cost is immeasurable. The toll it takes on your mental health, the bruises it leaves on your self-esteem, it's real and it's crippling. You wonder if you're good enough. You wonder if you're lovable. You wonder if maybe, just maybe, this is all you deserve. And that's a terrible place to be. I want you to know something. You do not have to stay there. You do not have to accept the bare minimum of someone's affection or attention. You do not have to keep giving more than you can afford to lose. There is a way out. There are steps you can take to detach emotionally while still honoring the love you've had in your heart. Because detaching doesn't mean you never cared. Detaching doesn't mean you become cold and unfeeling. It means you value your peace more than your pain. It means you recognize that you can love someone while acknowledging that they're not healthy for you. It means taking a stand for your own well-being. That's not cruelty. That's courage. That's wisdom. Now, I know some of you might be feeling nervous. Maybe you're terrified of the emptiness that could follow if you step away. Maybe you don't know how to survive without the relationship's familiar rhythms, even if those rhythms hurt. But understand this, the emptiness you fear is often the space you need for something better to grow. And yes, it's going to hurt. Yes. There will be moments where you question your decisions. You might find yourself staring at your phone, waiting for a text, or feeling the phantom echoes of a person's presence. But healing is never immediate. It's a process. And every act of self-care, every boundary set, every intentional step toward freedom is like a candle in the dark, guiding you to a more fulfilling life. So tonight, I want us to take those steps together. Let's talk about these 5 rules. They aren't complicated. They are straightforward, honest, and they will require you to be brave. But I promise you this, if you give yourself permission to follow them, you'll discover that no relationship, no memory, no heartbreak has the power to shackle your spirit unless you allow it. You are worth so much more than you've been settling for. It's time to choose yourself. It's time to walk away from what's been keeping you small. It's time to detach. First rule, you must decide that your mental and emotional well-being is your top priority no matter what. Sounds simple, right? But how many of us actually treat ourselves like a priority? How many times do we say yes to someone else's demands, their manipulations, their guilt trips, when every fiber in our being screams, no? This isn't about being selfish. It's about honoring your spirit. Picture a shield around you, a protective barrier that refuses to let in disrespect or disregard. To truly detach from someone, you have to understand that your peace is non-negotiable. If you don't place the highest value on your own emotional state, no one else will. People treat you the way you show them you want to be treated. So if you consistently forgive bad behavior without consequence, if you consistently compromise your needs, you're sending a message that your well-being can be dismissed. That's why rule number 1 is the cornerstone. Decide your peace is priceless. Let me ask you something. Have you ever given up your boundaries just to keep someone in your life? Maybe you erased your own preferences to avoid conflict. Perhaps you walked on eggshells because you didn't want to upset them, or you justified their mistreatment by saying they just had a bad day. But day after day turns into a pattern, and before you know it, your self-worth is in pieces. I've seen it happen time and time again. Once you allow one line to be crossed, the next violation comes easier, and then easier, and then easier, until one day you're living in a world you never imagined for yourself. One where you barely recognize your reflection. It's time to step out of that cycle. Look inside yourself and pinpoint exactly what you need: respect, understanding, compassion, support. Those are not luxuries. Those are basic human requirements in any relationship. And if someone isn't meeting them, you have to be willing to create distance. Now, this doesn't mean you demonize the other person or pretend they have no value. It simply means you recognize you cannot stay in a place that compromises your sense of self. The moment you make that choice, my peace is paramount. You'll feel a shift. It might feel uncomfortable at first, like trying on a new pair of shoes, but keep wearing them. Keep telling yourself, I deserve to feel safe. I deserve to feel valued. In time, you'll grow into that mindset, and it'll become second nature. That's power. But it's not just about telling yourself you deserve peace. You have to enforce it. If you continue to respond to late night phone calls or manipulative texts, if you continue to let them steer your emotions, your words mean nothing. Emotional detachment requires consistent action. It's like learning a new language. You can't just read the dictionary once and call yourself fluent. You have to practice every day. You have to remind yourself daily, my priority is to protect my heart. My priority is to heal. And that might mean blocking calls or unfollowing social media accounts. It might mean seeking professional help or confiding in a trusted friend who can hold you accountable. Because sometimes you need an outside voice to remind you of the promises you made to yourself. If you ignore this first rule, if you keep letting your sense of self-worth be a low priority, then any other rule you try to follow will crumble. The foundation will be shaky. When you believe that your well-being is negotiable, you'll let your guard down the moment the other person shows the slightest improvement or affection. You'll slip back into old habits. You'll keep hoping they'll change. That's why I can't stress this enough. Decide right now that your peace is your baseline. Decide that anything that threatens it cannot stay. Let that become your creed. Because until you do, you can't move forward. And I want you to move forward. I want you to step into a future where your happiness isn't dictated by how someone else treats you. So hold on to that commitment. Let it guide you through every stage of detachment. Let it remind you that life is too short, too precious, to be spent in a state of constant turmoil. By anchoring yourself to the non-negotiable nature of your peace, you create the internal conditions necessary for healing. You pave the way for the second rule and the third and all the rest. Because once you decide you matter, that you are worthy of joy, you open a door to freedom. That door might feel heavy, but I promise you, your newfound resolve will give you the strength to push it wide open. Keep that shield up and march forward. You are not just deciding to detach from someone else, you are deciding to reattach to your best self. Second rule, create emotional boundaries like your life depends on it, because in many ways it does. Boundaries are the invisible lines we draw around our hearts and minds that protect us from harmful influences. Think of them as the walls of a castle. You decide who can come inside, how far they can roam, and when they must leave. Without boundaries, you're leaving the gates wide open for chaos and harm to come storming in. So how do you establish these boundaries? You start by identifying your triggers. Notice what words or actions cut you deep. Notice the patterns of behavior that keep you stuck in a cycle of emotional highs and lows. Sometimes it's manipulative language, those guilt trips that start with, "If you really love me, you would," or "After all I've done for you." Pay attention to how you feel the moment those words are said. Do you clench your jaw? Do you feel your heart rate spike? That's a signal your body is giving you. Pay attention. This is not okay. When you have that sense of recognition, you've located a boundary line. Name it. Name it. Acknowledge it. Decide what crossing that boundary means for you. Are you going to end the conversation? Are you going to leave the room? Are you going to stop responding to texts for the rest of the day? Let your response be a clear message that you will not engage in toxic dynamics. People might call you dramatic. They might say you're overreacting. But what's the alternative? You keep letting them step on your heart. Keep letting them drain your emotional energy and lose yourself in the process. Let them call it what they will. You are preserving your well-being. I recall talking to a friend who was stuck in an on-off-again relationship. Every time they tried to set a boundary, the other person would push back with tears, accusations, or sweet promises that never materialized. My friend felt guilty for even wanting a boundary. They worried about being cruel or heartless. But guess what? Boundaries aren't cruel. They're honest. They tell people exactly how we expect to be treated. And if someone pushes, is, or disrespects those boundaries consistently, that tells you everything you need to know about their capacity to value you. Don't let fear of being misunderstood keep you tethered to an unhealthy connection. The more you practice stating and enforcing your boundaries, the clearer you'll become about who truly cares for you and who simply wants to use you. That clarity is painful at times, but it's also a gift because you stop wasting your precious energy on people who don't treat you right. Now, let's talk about emotional boundaries in the digital age. Social media can be a trigger minefield. Seeing that person's posts or pictures can reignite old feelings, illusions of closeness, or sparks of jealousy. Sometimes the boundary you need is digital distance. Remove them from your feeds. Block if you have to. You might think that's extreme, but remember why you're doing this. Your heart needs time to mend. Constant reminders will only slow the healing process. It's like trying to recover from a wound while poking it every few minutes to see if it still hurts. Yes, it does. So protect yourself. Log off, mute, unfollow. Do what you have to do to maintain emotional stability. If you ignore this second rule, if you refuse to create or honor boundaries, you'll keep giving the other person permission to occupy your emotional space. You'll keep letting them walk in unannounced, rearrange the furniture in your head, and leave you to clean up the mess. That's no way to live. Boundaries are your fortress. They're your safe haven. They're the line in the sand that says, I'm here for me now, and this is how I deserve to be treated. Once you uphold these boundaries, you'll realize that every time you say no to someone else's disrespect, you say yes to your own self-worth. Third rule, engage in radical self-awareness and self-care. Now, self-awareness isn't just some abstract concept. It's the work of your soul. It's the daily practice of checking in with yourself and asking, how am I feeling right now? Why am I feeling this way? Where is this emotion coming from? And what do I need to do about it? Without self-awareness, we stumble around in the dark, guided by habit and reaction. We react to texts with immediate anxiety. We answer phone calls we know we shouldn't. We meet up just to talk things through, only to end up more hurt, more confused, more entangled. But with self-awareness, you can see the patterns forming. You notice that you feel lonely around 9 p.m., so you're tempted to call them. You notice that hearing a certain song makes you want to send that nostalgic text. Instead of acting on impulse, you observe your feelings like a scientist. You recognize them, but you don't automatically do what they tell you. That's emotional freedom. Self-care flows naturally from self-awareness. Once you know what you feel, you can address those feelings in healthy, nurturing ways. Maybe it's taking a walk outside when you feel your anxiety rise. Maybe it's journaling when your thoughts won't stop spinning. Maybe it's taking a hot shower and letting the water wash away the stress you've been carrying. It might even be something as simple as giving yourself permission to cry without judging your tears. because sometimes you just need that release. The problem is many of us confuse self-care with selfishness. We think we're supposed to always be there for everyone else, sacrificing ourselves in the process. But if you're running on empty, you can't pour into anyone. You can't offer real love, real compassion, real presence if you're depleted. When you detach from someone, there's often a hole, an empty space where their presence used to be. You feel it in the quiet moments, instead of filling that space with more chaos or jumping into another toxic dynamic. Fill it with activities and practices that feed your soul. Discover new hobbies. Read books that inspire you. Take that dance class you've always wanted to try. Engage in therapy or coaching if you can. Talk to a mentor. The possibilities are endless, but they all point to one crucial fact. If you don't actively nurture your spirit, you'll slip back into the familiar patterns of needing the wrong kind of connection just to feel whole. I remember a time in my own life where I was giving so much of myself to someone who couldn't reciprocate. My mind was consumed by their needs, their demands, their problems. And in the process, I forgot who I was. I neglected my passions. I neglected my friendships. I forgot what it felt like to just cease in peace and enjoy my own company. That's what happens when you don't practice self-awareness. You lose your identity trying to be everything for someone else. That's why it's radical self-awareness, because it requires you to go against the grain of your old habits. It's radical self-care because it demands you place your well-being at the forefront when maybe for years you've been told that's not okay. But trust me, it is okay. It's more than okay, it's essential. If you ignore this third rule, you might manage to put some distance between you and the other person, but you won't heal the root wounds. You'll end up attracting the same dynamics in the future, repeating the same patterns. Emotional detachment without self-awareness is just running away. You can't outrun yourself. You have to turn inward and figure out what made you cling to that relationship in the first place. Were you seeking validation? Were you repeating a childhood pattern? Were you lonely, bored, scared? Only by understanding those motives can you truly break free. So let your inner reflection be a daily practice. Let self-care be your new default. And watch how your perspective shifts from scarcity, believing you need them, to abundance, knowing you have everything you need within you. Fourth rule, limit or cut off contact if necessary and trust that space is your ally. Now, this might be the toughest one because it often feels harsh or extreme. You might tell yourself, I can handle being friends, or I just want to check up on them now and then, or we can still talk, just not as much. But if you're serious about detaching, you have to recognize that those little openings keep the emotional wound raw. A scab can't form if you keep scratching it. A heart can't heal if you keep letting old triggers resurface daily. That doesn't mean you have to block this person forever, pretend they don't exist, or burn every bridge behind you. But it does mean giving yourself enough room to breathe, to recalibrate, and to form a life where their influence is minimized. Sometimes it means going no contact for a while. Sometimes it means drastically reducing communication. And yes, it can feel like a void at first, especially if this person was a big part of your life. You'll be tempted to reach out. You'll feel pangs of longing or guilt or second guessing. That's normal. But remind yourself, this is the time for healing. This is the time for learning who you are without their presence overshadowing your every move. Too often, people remain entangled because they mistakenly believe that emotional attachments vanish the moment you say goodbye. That's a lie. Emotional attachments linger, fed by old memories, nostalgic hopes, and occasional illusions that maybe, just maybe, things could be different if you give it one more try, one more talk, one more chance. But that more easily turns into an unending cycle. So the best way to break it is to create genuine distance in that space. New habits form. You learn to rely on yourself. You realize you can go to bed at night without that text message, good night. You realize you don't need to check their social media to feel validated. You discover that your world, though emptier at first, gradually becomes a peaceful place where you can process the past and plan for the future without constant emotional interference. If you refuse to limit contact, you'll remain in a gray area, neither fully free nor fully committed. And in that murky space, it's easy to get stuck. You'll find yourself rereading old texts, analyzing every interaction, and tying your emotions in knots. That is not freedom. That's self-inflicted torture. I knew someone who tried to break free from a toxic partner, but insisted on daily texts to check in. It only prolonged the heartbreak. Every time they got a message, hope surged, followed by disappointment when nothing had really changed. They were on an emotional roller coaster, all because they wouldn't trust the power of space. When they finally decided to cut off contact, it felt like ripping off a Band-Aid. Painful at first, but then the healing started. They discovered new joys, new passions, and a renewed sense of self. That's the power of space. It's not empty, it's expansive. It's like fertile soil where new seeds can take root. So if this step seems daunting, remind yourself that true healing needs time away from what wounded you. Let yourself grieve. Let yourself miss them. Let yourself feel the emptiness. Then fill that emptiness with new experiences and healthy connections. That's how you break free. Fifth rule. Learn to forgive yourself and them. But don't confuse forgiveness with reunion. Forgiveness is one of the most misunderstood concepts in emotional detachment. People think forgiving means forgetting, or worse, welcoming the person back with open arms. That's not it. Forgiveness is about releasing resentment and anger so that those toxic emotions don't keep poisoning you. It's about saying, I won't let this bitterness define who I am or how I live. It's not an invitation for the other person to step back into your life. It's a declaration that you're moving on without carrying the weight of vengeance or regret. Forgiveness toward yourself is equally crucial. Often, when a relationship ends or becomes toxic, we blame ourselves. We replay our mistakes, thinking, if only I had done this or said that, or I was so foolish. But that self-condemnation traps you in a shame spiral. You did the best you could with what you knew then. Now you know better, so you can do better. That's growth. To forgive yourself is to embrace your own humanity, to accept that you can learn from your pain. Without self-forgiveness, You can't truly detach. You'll remain anchored to regret, tethered to a story that says you're unworthy of a fresh start. You are worthy. You deserve a new chapter. But you have to turn the page. And that requires letting go of blame, both for yourself and for the other person. I remember hearing a powerful story of a woman who had every right to be furious at her ex who mistreated her. She carried that anger for years, and it seeped into every aspect of her life, her new relationships, her career, her health. Then one day, she realized she was still emotionally attached to him through her anger. In hating him so intensely, she was still feeding the bond she wanted to break. So she made the courageous choice to forgive. She wrote him a letter, not to send, but to pour out all the rancor, all the sadness. At the end, she wrote, "I release you and I release myself from the chains of this story." She burned the letter, watched the smoke rise, and felt a weight lift off her shoulders. Did she call him up to reconcile? No. She simply let go. That's the essence of forgiveness in the context of detachment. You choose your peace over your pain. If you don't forgive, you remain stuck, reliving the hurt, recycling the anger, and keeping that person alive in your emotional life. That's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to suffer. By forgiving, you free yourself to move forward. You reclaim your energy, your heart, your future. Now, let's bring all of these rules together. You've made your peace your priority. You've built boundaries that protect your emotional realm. You've cultivated self-awareness and self-care to nourish your spirit. You've given yourself space by limiting contact. And finally, you've forgiven not to invite them back, but to liberate yourself. These 5 rules are interwoven threads. If you leave one out, the tapestry is incomplete. If you keep them all in place, you'll find yourself standing in that open field once again. But this time, the air will feel different, lighter, brighter, because you've detached from what weighed you down. It's a journey, and it's not always easy. But I promise it's worth every tear, every doubt, every moment of discomfort. Because at the end of this road is a stronger, wiser you, unafraid to walk forward alone, if that's what it takes to maintain your integrity, your joy, your wholeness. And now, we come to the end of this talk, where I want us to gather all these insights and let them sink in. Think back on the journey we just took together. We started by acknowledging that you are on the precipice of change, staring into the vast unknown of a life without the emotional entanglement that's been draining you. That moment, that awareness is the seed of power. It tells you there's another way to live, a way that cherishes your mental health, honors your boundaries, cultivates self-care, and allows space for genuine healing. We admitted something crucial. You can't keep living with the turmoil, the sleepless nights, the self-doubt that comes from being connected to someone who doesn't feed your spirit. You can't keep letting your self-worth hands weighing the balance for scraps of affection that never amount to real fulfillment. By daring to acknowledge the pain and the possibility of release, you took your first bold step forward. From there, we introduced our 5 rules, each a stepping stone on your path to emotional detachment. Rule 1 urged you to place your peace at the pinnacle, to recognize that no relationship is worth your mental destruction. I asked you to think about how often you neglected your own boundaries, how often you silenced your own needs just to keep a connection afloat. My hope is that you realized it doesn't have to be this way. You deserve to be your own priority. Rule 2 emphasized the importance of boundaries, those clear, unwavering lines that keep toxicity at bay. Without boundaries, your emotional world becomes a free for all, vulnerable to every guilt trip, every manipulation, every emotional ambush. I encouraged you to identify your triggers, to acknowledge when something feels wrong, and to boldly defend your emotional space. That's not cruelty, it's survival. Rule 3 brought self-awareness and self-care into the spotlight. I urged you to examine yourself, to probe those moments of weakness or habit that make you reach out, the very person you need to detach from. By integrating daily acts of self-care, you replace destructive coping mechanisms with healing rituals. You fill the void not with drama, but with growth. Then came Rule 4, the hard truth about contact. Sometimes you have to step away entirely. Sometimes you have to silence the phone, unfriend the social media profiles, and carve out an oasis of distance. That void hurts at first, but it's exactly what allows the scabs to form over your emotional wounds. It's what prevents the cycle of heartbreak from perpetuating itself. Finally, Rule 5, the healing balm of forgiveness. We talked about releasing resentment, not to invite the person back, but to free yourself from the shackles of bitterness. We explored how failing to forgive, either them or yourself, keeps you anchored to the past in a storm of anger and regret. Forgiveness is not a weakness, it's an act of liberation. Collectively, these rules form a blueprint for reclaiming your emotional autonomy. They're not abstract concepts. They're living practices you can apply every single day. But to see results, you have to commit. You can't just listen tonight and then revert to the old patterns tomorrow. This journey requires perseverance, a willingness to face discomfort, and the integrity to hold yourself accountable. As you stand at this crossroads of your life, I want you to feel the weight of that decision. Are you going to stay in the cycle of pain, or are you going to break free? It may not be easy, but profound change never is. When you choose detachment, you're actually choosing hope. Hope for a life unburdened by toxic ties. Hope for renewed self-esteem. Hope for real connections that honor who you are. Now, let's gather these lessons and distill them into a call to action. Ask yourself, what's one concrete step you can take today, right now, that aligns with these 5 rules? Maybe it's drafting a message that says, I need space. Please don't contact me for a while. Maybe it's putting your phone on Do Not Disturb after 8 p.m. Maybe it's reaching out to a therapist or joining a support group. Or maybe it's quietly, but firmly reminding yourself every morning, my peace is my priority. Whatever that step is, make it. Don't let this moment pass without committing to real action. Because action is where transformation happens. Words can inspire, but they only take root when followed by deeds. In taking these steps, you're not just preserving your heart, you're changing the entire trajectory of your life. You're stepping off a path that leads to repeated heartbreak and stepping onto a path that leads to self-love, clarity, and purpose. Let that ignite a spark of excitement. This isn't about what you're losing, but about what you stand to gain: more self-respect, deeper wisdom, and a future that doesn't revolve around fear or desperation. I know the journey can feel overwhelming. You might worry about the fallout, about other people's opinions, about whether you're making a mistake. But I want to remind you that staying in a toxic dynamic is the real mistake. The real danger lies in continuing to sacrifice your well-being, your potential, your future for a relationship that only steals from you. Picture the life you want a year from now. Peaceful nights where you sleep soundly. Fulfilling days where you chase your passions. Supportive friendships that reflect mutual respect, and a heart unburdened by constant second guessing. That life is waiting for you. It's real. It's attainable. But you have to walk towards it. Nobody else can do it for you. And as we close, I want you to lock in one final message. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you failed at love. It means you're brave enough to release something that can't flourish so you can create space for something that can. It's an act of self-love, an act that says, I refuse to let myself worth be dictated by another person's capacity to love me. If someone truly belongs in your life, they will respect your boundaries, support your growth, and treasure your well-being. If they can't do that, you owe it to yourself to walk away. That's not abandonment of love. That's an affirmation of it, love for yourself and love for the possibility of healthier connections in the future. So stand tall, stand firm. Trust the process. Allow yourself to feel every pang, every twinge of sadness, every flutter of fear, and then turn those feelings into a testament of your resilience. Let them serve as a reminder that you are alive. And that being alive means you can adapt, you can transform, and you can emerge stronger than you ever imagined. You are not broken. You are becoming unbreakable. Now I leave you with this. Breathe in the promise of a new dawn. Breathe out the toxicity of old wounds. Lift your head, square your shoulders, and step forward with conviction. You have all you need to detach emotionally from what no longer serves you. You have the power to rewrite your story with courage, dignity, and hope. This is your moment. Seize it. Let go of the person who weighs down your heart and watch as your spirit lifts you to places you never dreamed possible. You've got this. I believe in you. And I can't wait to see the heights you'll reach once you finally set yourself free.